If you've been a part of the Madden community for any amount of time, you know that there's a lot of problems with Madden, and you also know that there are no shortage of people that are more than willing to point out those problems. There are even those that claim that this year's Madden 19 at the time of recording, is a broken and unplayable mess. I'm not going to go that far, but it was definitely a step down from previous entries in terms of gameplay, and there's a lot of reasons why. The introduction of real player motion, the innovation that makes all of your players move like a World War I tank, caused things like catches and coverages to be almost purely animation based as opposed to player skill, whether it be the player on the field or the player holding the controller. The franchise mode menus were still clunky, and franchise itself is still way too basic. Oh, and I still haven't been able to complete an overtime game because the game craps out if it goes to OT. That's only dipping our pinky toe into the problems with Madden this year, but there are a lot of things that could be added as opposed to fixed, and that's what I'm wanting to primarily focus on. So welcome to the Maybe Someday Madden Wishlist, where we take a look at a lot of things where I really want them in Madden, but don't expect them to come anytime soon. Keep in mind, I have no experience with game development, so I'm really just spitballing ideas without any clue as to how hard it would be to implement, and I'm just saying things that I think would make the game better. So sit back, get some popcorn, cheese fries, and relax, because we're in for a bumpy ride, folks. Too many players in Madden feel the exact same regardless of who they actually are. Tell me, what's the difference between Tyreek Hill and John Ross? Yes, you're technically correct if your answer is one beats his kid is and a confirmed fucking idiot, but focus on the field. Both are really fast, like I'm pretty sure a rocket souped up on cocaine and Red Bull would be slower than these two. But if you're looking at Madden, that's about all you need to know about them. They're speed receivers. Anybody who has watched both of these players know that they couldn't be more different from one another though. Tyreek Hill tends to get great releases off the line and scares the ever-loving shit out of the defense on the other side so bad that most of the time they play him really far off, like 7 or 10 yards. Hill also has possession ability. John Ross lacks both of these attributes, which makes him one of the most overrated picks of all time. But he's so fast, though. In real life, this means that you can easily tell who the better receiver is just by looking at 1 or 2 games of both players. In Madden, however, the line tends to get blurred. Instead of all of these questions to a quality receiver molded into one, it's more like asking one question and then no more because you only need to ask one. DK Metcalf would be one of the greatest draft prospects in Madden history based off of nothing more than his measurables, but the reason why he fell in real life is because of concerns with injuries and drops, neither of which are really big concerns in Madden because all that matters is that he has the trait of fast. Not even his size would be that much of a factor because taller receivers in Madden don't use their length or height in any meaningful way, so it's really just fast. That's all you need to be. The problem isn't just for receivers either. Elite O-linemen like Taylor Lewan and Joel Bitonio don't feel like they make a big difference from that random backup that was drafted to be nothing more than depth. And there's a famous video by RBT, granted it was from 2 years ago, that should O-linemen that were literally 0 overall be playing, they could pass block for just as long as a 99 overall line, if not longer in one case. If I have a 99 overall pass blocking tackle, he should pretty much delete any direct pass rush coming from his side every single time based off of skill alone. While we're on the offensive side of the ball, there are also problems with the running backs all feeling the exact same. Saquon Barkley and LeGarrette Blount are completely different players, and I believe you'd be hard-pressed to find similarities than differences in real life. Blount is a bruising back who excels at bowling over and going through people and doesn't really try to be the hero in most cases by bumping it to the outside. This is the opposite of Saquon, who's a master of bumping runs to the outside in order to get a big play. In Madden, you can't tell the difference in playstyles because these two are just not accounted for. Oh, and also according to Madden, Blake Bortles will outthrow Tom Brady almost every time, and I don't feel like I need to explain the problem with that. On the defensive side of the ball, the problem is a bit less pronounced, but still noticeable. D-linemen all tend to feel the same, with no real differences in pass rush especially, and corners don't feel distinct in their playstyles either, no matter what archetype they fall under. Every single player in the NFL is unique, and I want that to be reflected in the game so I can tell the differences between truly elite players and the middle-of-the-road starters. But how, I hear you asking? Well, that's not an easy question to answer, but the first thing I do is expand upon the trait system. Instead of just having basic characteristics like what catches a player can make or whether or not they have a high motor, expand the system to include more things that deal with the player's style of football. For running backs, a perfect example would be balanced, conservative, or aggressive on stretching runs, with aggressive making the player more likely to bump around to the outside as opposed to just taking a 3 or 4 yard gain with putting their head down and going. Also for running backs, you could add a running style trait, with power, elusive, or balance being the options which would affect what moves the player would be most likely to use. I've seen Derrick Henry try to back juke instead of just stiff arm a safety in Madden, and trust me, Henry would not hesitate to stiff arm the safety instead of just trying to juke him out because Henry's stiff arm is deadly. I'm not a genius, but I could list off at least 3 distinct traits you could have for each position right now. For quarterbacks, you could talk about their ability to manipulate the pocket, whether they choose to step up, a la Tom Brady, escape, a la Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes, or somewhere in the middle, more like a Ryan Tannehill. You could also talk about their throwing tendencies, whether they try to throw it on a complete nutter line, again, a la Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, whether they're more likely to throw it with touch, see Phillip Rivers, or somewhere in between, like Tom Brady. You could also talk about their ability to audible. Tom Brady audibles frequently. Phillip Rivers audibles sometimes, and there are a couple of quarterbacks that I can think of that never audible out of a play. You can also talk a little bit about their mentality, whether it be conservative, balanced, or aggressive, which is how likely a player is to try and go exclusively for the big plays and ignore the underneath routes. I feel like that should be obvious for which one's which. For the running backs, we already talked about the stretching, the run, and the run style, but we could also talk about patience, with running backs being impatient, balanced, or patient. Patient being Le'Veon Bell, impatient being someone more like a Saquon Barkley, who's just going to run until he eventually finds a hole. For wide receivers and tight ends, you could talk about what their favorite type of catch is, whether it be the rack, possession, or aggressive catch, which is what they'll default to. You can talk about what type of release is their favorite, whether they like stutter stepping off the line or just simply slapping and going. You could go with the after catch preference, which would be a stop, starter, balance, and full go, which would be what type of routes the player excels after the catch most. A stop starter would be great at making defenders miss after catching a hitch or a curl route, and a full go would be better at slants and crossing routes. You could also have them see what they could do with a contested ball, whether they try to block them with their body or box them out with their 50-50 ability, or just jump to get the advantage on the frame to block out the defenders there. For the offensive line, you can have their mentality be technical, balanced, or mauler, which is how they choose to block most of the time, whether it be pure technique or just being a dickhead. You could have their pass protection style be run around, balanced, or anchor, which would be run around, just take them as far as you can downfield, and anchor, just try and stand your ground. Climbing tendency, which is how quickly they'll move up to a linebacker, whether it be quick, balanced, or finisher, meaning finisher, they just stay on the defensive lineman. For defensive tackles, you could have their pass rushing focus be speed, balance, or power, which is what types of moves they'll try the most. For the run defense, you could have one gap, balance, and stem, which is how a lineman will play the run. For an example, Aaron Donald and Quentin Williams both stem against the run as opposed to one gap play. And you could have mentalities be conservative, balanced, or aggressive, which is how aggressive the lineman is off the snap, where they try to focus on blowing the O-line back or more focus on just plugging the hole. For edge rushers and defensive ends, you could have the same pass rush move focus on speed, balance, and power, but you could also have the area focus being on the inside, head up, or outside, which is what direction of the rusher will take against the tackle. On the bend and flexibility, it's how quick a rusher is off the edge and their ability to go upfield to get the sack off the edge. For linebackers, you could have their hitting tendency for how hard they hit, with hard hitter, balance, and technical, which is how a linebacker tries to tackle, with the technical skill being just get him down any way possible. You can have the zone end tendency, which is high, middle, and low. Say you have two crossing routes in the middle. If he has high, he'll cover the back route. If it's low, he'll cover the front route, and middle somewhere in between. His play tendency would be run, balance, and pass, where a player will tend to default to on situations like draws or play actions, whether he chooses to drop back or try and go up for the run. For cornerbacks, you could have their man specialty, whether they be bump and run or off coverage, where a corner would be best at playing as opposed to just kind of letting him sit there. For their ball tendency, you could have them play the receiver, try and go for the swat on the ball, or try to go for the interception. For their run support, it could be conservative, balanced, or aggressive, how aggressive a corner is when they believe the run is being called. For safeties, you could have their zone discipline be inside, outside, or balanced, which basically if you're running four verticals, inside would be you take the slot route, and outside would be taking the wide out route. For the play tendency, you could be Punisher, Balanced, or Ball Hawk. If you're a Punisher, you're just going to try and smack the ever-loving hell out of the receiver. And if you're a Ball Hawk, you'll just go for the pick. And for the tackle style, it's pretty much the exact same as linebackers. Boom. By implementing those traits alone would help people be able to tell the difference between each player based on their play and not just the names on the jersey. You'll also notice that very few of those traits have the binary, this is good and this is bad choice, because it's just the way that players play their games. It would also really help in franchise because most of the time I don't even bother remembering the players' names because they all feel like the exact same person that's completely replaceable by someone coming up in the next draft. Another way to make players feel different from one another is actually having their size account for something, like I said earlier. Have stuff like hand size and arm length actually matter. Arm length especially would be nice to see for linemen because that's stuff actual NFL scouts and coaches look for a very good reason. It's very useful against the edge rushing, and the edge rushers also are taking a look at arm length because, well, whoever has the longer arms has the advantage. Feels like 9 times out of 10 in Madden that the players' measurables just don't really matter all that much, and that's just not how it works out in the NFL. Unless, of course, you're Aaron Donald, in which case you can do whatever the hell you want because who's going to tell you no? Finally, you could add a little bit of the player's personality into the equation as well. I would absolutely love to hate playing OBJ and his hot dogging in my Ravens rebuilds, and it would be really interesting to see the personalities of a team mesh together. Would all these things take a lot of time to implement? Well, the traits probably would, I'll admit that, but these changes would add to the immersion of the game by having special players actually feel like they're special at the best, and making every single player feel unique at the absolute least. Football's a very scheme-based game. You hear this talked about up and down on almost every NFL broadcast. Oh, this player fits perfectly for this coach's scheme that he has. The problem in Madden is that it feels like the schemes are almost secondary when making coaching decisions because the general schemes are far too simplistic. The perfect example of this is on the offensive schemes. There does not exist an offense in this world that only wants deep threats or only wants possession receivers. But because you're confined to the schemes the game gives you, you're forced to play by that rule or get handicapped in development. The fix for this is expanding the depth chart positions for the scheme to have things like tight end 2s, multiple wide receivers, backup running backs, and rushing styles on defense. Because I know for a fact that if I had a receiver room of Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, they would definitely be part of my scheme, even if they have wildly different skill sets and backgrounds. Oh, and also, let the player build their own unique scheme. Will this result in a few players cheesing the system and changing the scheme around players to give them more XP? Well, yeah, it will. But you can't tell me that NFL teams don't do the same thing. NFL teams constantly adjust their schemes to the players they have, not by massive overhauls, like you'd be forced to do in Madden by just outright overhauling to a new scheme, but by tiny adjustments to the plays or play calling. But there's another part of scheming that is completely ignored in Madden: the week-to-week scheming done by NFL teams. You get maybe 0.00001% of what this should be in weekly training, but it doesn't go nearly far enough. Very few NFL teams go in with the exact same game plan every week, and those that do tend to get slaughtered very quickly, a la Arizona Cardinals this last year. It's the teams that adjust week to week and establish plans for the game beforehand that tend to win the most. Think of teams like the Bears, Rams, Saints, Patriots, and Chiefs. All these teams were known to make little week-to-week adjustments based on who they were playing. The Bears and Patriots famously shut down the Rams' offense and had decimated pretty much everyone else beforehand because they prepared and game planned for it. Think of a system where you can establish a game plan before you played a game that week. Say I'm playing as the Cardinals, and this week I'm playing against the Rams. On the offensive side of the ball, I know for a fact that my offensive line will not be able to handle Aaron Donald, so I can make it a point in a menu or training beforehand to focus on Aaron Donald and either trap block him or double team him on running plays, and make sure that the offensive line has help from a running back on passing plays. I could also focus more on the quick passing game or routes that abuse the Rams' tendency to rely on zone defenses. On defense, I could tell the safeties to focus on bracketing either Brandon Cooks or Cooper Kupp in order to keep their numbers down, or I could tell the linebackers to play a more coverage-based and conservative game when faced with possible play-action situations, or work on man coverage to force Jared Goff into making mistakes, almost like exactly what was done in the Super Bowl this year. Little adjustments like that, made on a week-to-week basis, are what win football games in the NFL because the talent gap is so small. Not only this, it would make the player feel like a freaking genius if they won the game based off nothing more than looking at the other team and scheming around them for that week. And if the player schemes incorrectly or makes a few bad choices, it is 100% their fault because they made a bad choice. You know what would make this system even better? If you actually made halftime have a purpose in the game. Right now, halftime in Madden is only there because NFL games have halftimes. They have none of the stuff that actually happens during the halftime. The fine adjustments made to the scheme established beforehand, the potential pep talks and morale boosts given in the locker room of a close game. Give each side a minute or two in real life to make little adjustments and give halftime a purpose in game. The best part about all this? It's completely optional and only rewards the most hardcore of players. A casual player could just set everything to auto and sit down and play a football game. The diehards could plan around everything and make sure that they are 100% prepared for what is going to happen in that game. It also gives people the incentive to learn the game of football instead of just pressing buttons and hoping for the best. The next thing I want to talk about is the playbook system in Madden. It's way too shallow. There's no option for creating a play or really even making a playbook uniquely the players. You're more or less forced to take what you're given, and to the developer's credit, there's a lot of plays to pick from, but here's the thing. I don't want to just pick and choose what I'm given by the developers because my mind works completely differently from the developers. I want the opportunity to feel like an absolute genius because I draw up a play that really worked in a game. I also equally want the opportunity to feel like an absolute moron when I draw up a play that just doesn't work. It would also really help the scheme idea that I just mentioned, for each player building up their own unique scheme. Here's my idea for an ideal playbook creator. Give us a list of places that we can put a player, let us build a formation from that, and then let us customize the routes that we are given or the type of runs that we choose. I'm not saying that you should essentially give the player a pencil and say, go nuts with what routes they draw up or where players are lined up. Just give us a list of routes and places that are established in the NFL and let us customize what receivers run what routes and when. Also, let us set up our own read options or throw in receiver motions for a little bit of variety. This already somewhat exists with the hot route systems pre-play, you're just putting more emphasis for the player to do what they want beforehand. Let me get a little self-inserty here. A formation that I always thought was interesting was a formation that involved two receivers on one side, one out wide and the other in the slot, and two tight ends lined up close to the line on the opposite side, the quarterback in shotgun and the running back on the same side as the receivers. It looks something like this. I think this is interesting because you have numbers advantage when running with power to the tight end side, but you're forcing coverage to one side for the secondary with the receivers. I've not seen a team run with this formation concept. I want to be the first, but because I'm a college freshman, I have yet to get the chance to do this in real life, so let me try it in the video game. Let me armchair quarterback, damn it. That's just one idea, and this level of customization and variety would make playing the game feel unique and fresh for every and each player, just because each and every player is different. Do you want to recreate some college offenses and run some flexbone? You're a masochist and probably not that reasonable, but more power to you. Do you want to run a purely spread offense with a few wrinkles and motions? By all means, do it. You want to run a compact offense that emphasizes read options and quick passes? Well, rootin', tootin', runnin', shootin', keep on truckin', soldier. It's all up to the player and their own imagination. Well, is this balanced? Well, it should be. All that you're doing is taking things that already exist and mixing them up with a little bit in order to give it your own flavor. Will there be cheesy route combinations? Well, yeah, of course there will be. There are cheesy route combinations in the game now, but this would just allow the player to put their own spice to the cheese or have the discipline to not use the routes that break the game. My point here is this. People will find the plays that break the game in the playbooks that are given by the developers anyway. Let the people customize their own playbooks in whatever way they want. Another thing that I hear people talking about is the coaching system, which is also really dull. A few experience bonuses, some scouting points, the ability to bring people out of retirement. Weekly goal boosts. It's shameful. Now, a lot of people always suggest bringing back the coordinator system that was in NCAA 14, but I understand why that isn't back in the game for legal reasons. That doesn't mean you can't replicate its effects. You can still have the skill trees that were present in NCAA 14 without the offensive and defensive coordinators. You can have a coach that has XP boosts, sure, but also gives his players more morale on the road. Or if you're playing the game, have indicators for what player on the defensive side you should read for a particular passing concept. Or make it easier to determine what players can make what catches and when. Have coaches be more easily established chemistry between players on the team. In fact, I had so many ideas that I created miniature skill tree concepts. Just as ideas for the head coach, you can have a talent farmer who has things like developmental boosts and more abilities to train and find younger players to develop into future stars. You have the tactician who has advantages like either scheming or indicators making on-the-field reads easier for the player to see. You have the motivator who has advantages to morale and confidence for players and can get players fired up for bigger games. If you were to mix those in with coordinator bonuses for things like the passing game or offense, and coverage bonuses on defense, these would make the coaches actually have personality and matter in the grand scheme of the game, as opposed to more or less just being avatars you see every once in a while in games or in the franchise menus. There would be a distinct difference between playing a team run by Sean McVay and Ben McAdoo. There's a reason why one has a job and the other doesn't, because the other is clearly a superior coach and would be able to help his players far more than the other coach could. I want to be able to see that difference in game, and making these changes to the coaching system would only serve to help that. Now that we've talked about schemes and player distinction, let's talk about the mode that I play most, franchise mode. Let's start off with the contract system. Just like everything else in franchise mode, it's undercooked and so bad that it feels outright raw most of the time. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because other people have talked about it to death, people like that franchise guy who I more than recommend watching his wishlist video as well. But we should have the ability to front or backload contracts, have club or player options, just how much money is guaranteed, give players an assigned role. Basically take the contract system and MLB The Show and add on that a front or backloading system and we're good to go. Oh, and have more free agents hit the market that actually mattered, because I swear I've had 12 straight years of useless free agent classes in my Chiefs franchise. But now let's talk about one of the areas that I actually don't mind as it stands right now. Yeah, it's overly simplistic, but it does its job, and that is the draft and scouting. Now, even though it's effective and does its job well enough, I have ideas to make it better. Let's start with the actual scouting part first. Instead of just spending points to find a player's top 3 skills and leave it at that, why not add the option to see what the player's bottom 3 relevant skills are as well? Let's say we stick to the point system. You could spend 15 points to get the player's top skills, another 10 to see the bottom skills, and 5 to see the player's traits. This means that you get a more complete look at the players you're thinking about drafting, just like an NFL office would, and it also helps remove the situation where it feels like the CPU knows something about a player that I have no way of knowing, whenever a player's top 3 skills are very good, but they somehow end up as a red chip prospect with very low ratings. As an example, let's say I'm looking at a 5'11", 205-pound, 22-year-old wide receiver coming out of the University of Miami. I spend the first 15 points and see that he has A, spectacular catch, B plus catching, and B plus catch in traffic. Hey, I think I just found a pretty amazing prospect. Maybe a bit undersized, but nothing that can't be worked out. Think of a Julian Edelman. Then I spend another 10 points to see his weaknesses. C, medium route running, C minus elusiveness, and D minus deep route running. Okay, that tells me a bit more about him as a player. He's not a strong route runner or a rack threat, but he has the hands to make up for it, and at age 22 he can develop a little bit of a route running ability. Then I spend the final 5 points to discover that he has traits like possession, and his favorite catch type is also possession, and his contested catch type is body blocker, going back to the traits that I mentioned in the player distinction. Now I know that he's more than willing to wrestle a ball away from a defender, which makes up for his route running a bit. I officially have made this player into more than just a name on a draft board that I don't know much about. I made him an actual NFL prospect that has depth, nuance, and the ability to actually be looked at in more than just, okay, well, he's fast. Congratulations, I told you something that I could have told you regardless of looking at film or playing the game itself. Now we know about this person as a player. He's no longer just another 22-year-old wide receiver. He is Isaac White, to take something from Mr. Hurricane, even though he was a receiver out of Wisconsin. He's Harmon Whitaker. He's someone. He is a name that you will remember because he has depth. Now let's talk about the players that are there themselves. The logic behind the players themselves need to be reworked. I see way too many first-round picks that are above the age of 23 and are coming out of big-name schools like Alabama and Clemson. There is no way that someone who is excelled enough to be considered a first-round pick at any stage of their career would wait until the last minute to declare for the draft in age 23 and 24 seasons. To have the talented but older players be more in the middle to late rounds, similar to the way JUCO transfers were handled in the NCAA games. And speaking of schools, let's start having the scouting system account for things like stats out of college. Run it through the same simulation engine that the game uses for simming the NFL games, and then add a little something extra. Things like other players entering the draft from the same team or level of competition. If a running back enters the draft with amazing stats out of the University of Missouri, or Mizzou, as an example, an SEC school, but he also has 3 of his offensive linemen rated highly in the draft, it should take that into account. All of these things are looked at by scouts and coaches in the NFL today, and that's what makes draft coverage the most interesting time of the offseason for most people, including me. Oh, and speaking of draft coverage, expand upon the draft stories more. Have things like player personalities seep through a little bit more, and just overall have much more of them. Have more than just, oh, well, he's a superstar. No, have it be more about the player themselves. Have the team that won the national championship have their own little draft stories, so you can watch out for players coming out of that school. Or have stories commenting about how a player transferred from a bigger school down to a smaller school, or from a bigger school down to a smaller school, you said the same thing twice, or a smaller school to a bigger school. Make me care about who these players are. Make them more than just a name on a draft board, because that's what they should be. We shouldn't be just focused on 1 or 2 player traits. We should think of these players as actual NFL players. And that's what the problem is with the draft. I can't tell you the majority of the players' names that are on my Chiefs franchise 12 years in. As opposed to now, I could name almost half, if not 3/4 of the team that is even on the practice squad of the Chiefs. Because they're actual NFL players as opposed to just names on a list. That's the problem with the team building in franchise today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this second to last portion, which is gameplay, because a lot of people have much better ideas than I have, but we'll talk about the passing game first. It has to grow in a couple of key areas. First of which is ball trajectory. Let's take the simple goal line fade route. The goal of this route is to lob the ball to the back corner of the end zone and have the receiver jump up to get it at the back of the end zone into their loving arms like a basket. If you throw this route in Madden, you're going to get your receiver killed every single time because the ball trajectory is not going to match what the route needs. You can lob and throw it high, but you're still not throwing it to the back corner of the end zone. You're just kind of throwing it up. This problem extends to other routes too. Quarterbacks in the NFL will throw outside of routes if they believe the look is better to one side, especially on vertical routes. This doesn't happen in Madden. It leads to a lot of interceptions that would have otherwise been avoided because the quarterback would have never thrown it to the side the defender is on. I can't tell you how many times that I've had a safety to the direct left of the tight end and I want to throw it to the right, but it just doesn't happen. The ball just simply goes right into the loving arms of the safety. Speaking of receivers, we need to have more actual drops and pass breakups. There are very few receivers that have incompletions like they actually have in Madden, where they have it, start running, and then suddenly have a heart attack and drop the football. The incompletions in Madden don't feel earned by either side, and they don't feel natural. I'll gladly deal with more natural, he never had it to begin with, or it's off the hand situations, as opposed to the, oh, it's the old in and out that we always see in Madden. This also has to do with the animations, which determine 98% of receiver to defensive back outcomes, which shouldn't be the case. I shouldn't be able to tell who's going to get a 50-50 ball as soon as I throw it based off the animation that starts playing whenever I do throw it. As for the running game, just fix running backs not finding holes at all in the offensive line missing blocks because they suddenly turn into a blind man on the field and we'll be good. But here's the one that touches me the most. Defensive line play. Playing as a defensive lineman in Madden is the most basic and bare-bones position that you can play, bar none. The depth of gameplay boils down to nothing more than a quick-time event that doesn't even work most of the time. It's boring and could be made so much better with just one simple change. Give the player more control of what moves they use. There's a pretty easy way to accomplish that goal. Give a collection of pass rush and run moves to the right stick on your controller. Say you want to try a swim move to the exposed left shoulder of a tackle you're lined up against. Just move the right stick to the right and then circle it up to the other side to give a swim move a try. If that didn't work, try a spin move. Bring your right stick down and then spin it around to give that a shot. Not only does this add depth to the gameplay, but it makes it easier to chain together pass rush moves like people in the NFL do. Take Joey Bosa's famous stab and rip move. Hell, it wouldn't even be that hard to map to the controller. Have stabs be a sharp flick up and to the left or right. Have swim moves be to the right or left and then spin upwards. Have a spin move be a simple rotation around. Have bull rushes just be straight up on the right stick. And have rip moves be the reverse of swim moves, one side and then down. This would also help the problem of a quarterback being able to file his taxes and get his tax returns, maybe file a sandwich, raise a family, with spare time to throw the football, because the pass rush is just not getting there, which happens far more than it should in Madden. It almost happens as much as the insta-sheds, which are an equal problem. You can still have the success rate be tied somewhat to ratings, but put more control and tools in the player's hands in order to make something happen and make playing defensive line just more than a glorified QuickTime event. For this last little bit, there's just a bunch of little stuff that I didn't have time or didn't really want to flesh out an entire point for because they're just more or less quality of life things. First, add more voice actors for the quarterbacks, because I've heard the exact same voice actor over maybe 20 franchises now, and it's kind of getting old. Let us flip the run out of shotgun by flipping the side of the running back, which happens a lot in the NFL. Have more face variety for created players as opposed to the same 9 that you've used over the past couple of years. In franchise, stop having players get tactically nuked after the age of 29. Have the tutorials actually explain football concepts and play calling concepts to the player to make it more attuned for players that actually want to learn the game. Make home field advantage relevant for people that are going to play the game. And stop cutting to the coach's reaction to a play after almost every single play. Now, like I said at the very beginning, I'm not someone who has studied game design or knows anything about game development. But these are just my ideas for how to make Madden a better series going forward. I would really like to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section below. Whether you liked or disliked what I said, thank you for making it to the end of the video, and I'm glad to keep up the discussion with you in the comment section below. So,